Welcome back to the Deep 404. There is a whole heap of news today coming out of Ukraine, the Middle East and other regions. Transnistria starting to appear in the news. I'm going to cover off bits and pieces about those, but I might just start with a recent APNEWS article talking about some of the challenges that are occurring for the Ukrainian soldiers. Now, this is a report. This was reported. This is APNEWS, Western news source, and their reporting involved them speaking to a number of servicemen and commanders from the Ukrainian armed forces. I'm just going to read through a couple of the points that came out of this, just to give you an idea of what's going on for the Ukrainian forces at the moment. A Ukrainian soldier fighting near the city of Avdiivka said that his unit was recently outnumbered by about 5 to 1 when dozens of Russian soldiers stormed their position, killing everyone but himself and 2 others. So we have heard, of course, that the Ukrainians are struggling to mobilise and to get enough men to fight, and that the Russians have a large number of volunteers. It seems as though the numbers we've been hearing of the 600 to 700,000 Russian troops in Ukraine may now be correct. This article speaks of there being 300,000 Ukrainian troops left, and this is again a Western article. The reporter apparently conducted a lot of these interviews in Kiev. In this article, they talk about when there are new recruits coming to support them and resupply them. There are too few, too poorly trained, and often too old. These were interviews conducted with 24 Ukrainian soldiers, including 6 commanders. Brigades of normally a strength of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers are typically fighting with only 75% of their full strength. This is according to Vadim Ivchenko, who is a lawmaker and part of the Ukrainian Parliament's National Security, Defence and Intelligence Committee. Some brigades are now at a strength as low as 25%, he added. So instead of having 5,000 men, you're down to 1,250, something like that. At the start of the war, Ukrainian soldiers were rotated every 2 weeks for 1 week of rest. So 2 weeks at the front line fighting and then off for a week of rest. But now, he says, his soldiers fight for a month, then get 4 days of rest. So you can imagine the impact that this is having on those soldiers fighting for a month. Now, if you're fighting at your front line and you are in a situation where the enemy is pressuring you, then the difficulty with trying to do simple things, trying to go to the toilet safely, trying to deal with minor wounds and injuries, cuts and bruises, avoiding infection. Remember, it's freezing cold over there at the moment, so blood flow to the extremities is bad. Frostbite is something that can happen. Trying to get sleep. Trying to get sleep when at all random times during the night, and on purpose your enemy is firing shells and weapons in your direction for the express purpose of not letting you sleep. So going through that for a month, I don't know if any of you have ever gone without sleep for a night, or if you've tried 2 or 3 nights, things start to get very crazy as your mind just breaks down its ability to function properly. Now, these guys, most of them, are not going to be sleeping well. So if they're on the front line for a month, you can imagine just how wearing that is upon your psyche and your morale. And then having 4 days of rest before being turned around and sent back for another month. The demoralisation must just be crazy for these poor blokes. Dmitro, who is one of the commanders from near Avdiivka, who was interviewed, they're only giving a first name here and not wanting to indicate who they are. He said, "We have no people and nowhere to get them from." The average Ukrainian serviceman is now in their 40s. We have heard this for some time from Western sources. At the start of the conflict, it was reported that the average Ukrainian age of an armed forces or army serviceman was 27. And now within 2 years, that average has raised to 40. So this is according to Western officials. Commanders say the older the soldiers they get, the more they experience chronic illness, such as ulcers, hernias, and pinched nerves. Another One of the soldiers who was interviewed here, Dima, again, just his first name given, says that his assault company recently received 7 new recruits, and those 7 new recruits were aged between 55 to 58. Now, this isn't a Russian article coming out to try and spread bad news, propaganda about what is happening in the Ukrainian army. This is the AP, Associated Press news site, with interviews conducted in Kiev with Ukrainian forces. So now those new recruits that they got are 55 to 58 years age. I'm in my early 50s. I would not want to be going to war. General life with dealing with 2 small children and doing work in the yard can at times, be hard on the knees and the lower back if you're not careful. Trying to survive in cold, frozen mud, dugout trenches while people are shooting at you would very quickly turn my mind to how do I get out of this situation? So that's an article. You go and have a look for it. If you want to, on the APNEWS.com website. But I think it gives a feeling for where the Ukrainian troops are at the moment. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't Russian troops who are in bad condition as well. They're on the front line. They're suffering the same lack of sleep. But reportedly, the difference is they're being rotated regularly. So maybe they are still doing the 2 weeks and then knowing they are reliably going to get the week off and having that week away and coming back, and their morale is higher. If your morale's high, you can deal with things better. If you have strong supply lines feeding you, which it sounds as though the Russians do in many cases, then again, your creature comforts, your just quality of living while on the front line is better. You are perhaps able to get better sleep. You function better, less likely to hurt yourself, less likely to get sick and become injured. So overall, the Russian frontline positions, those soldiers seem to be in better shape than the Ukrainians, is what I'm reading from this article here. We know that the Ukrainians are working in their parliament to approve a mobilisation bill. That mobilisation bill is looking to raise 400,000 Ukrainian men and women to come and fight. They're talking about dropping the conscription age from 27 to 25. There has reportedly been 1,000 or more amendments already to this mobilisation bill. It's not a popular bill. There are increasing videos of men in Ukraine being just picked off buses, stories of Ukrainian wives saying their husband went to work and didn't come back because he was just taken and conscripted forcibly. In this article, there are reports of Ukrainian men who have gone in for a physical to their doctors and have been told, hey, you're fit to serve. Some of these working in what they would have normally considered to be required positions, perhaps working on the rail lines or something like that, where you thought they would have remained in that civilian area, ensuring that rail facilities or firefighting facilities are operating. But in some cases, it seems that even those men are being told, you are fit to fight, go to the front line. So Ukraine, we do know, is having troubles finding the men for the fight. There are reports that there are tens of thousands of men now hiding within Ukraine or hiding and looking to leave the country, trying to raise money to find a way to leave Ukraine so that they are not conscripted to go and fight. In other news, I'd look, a brief summary. Of course, Avdiivka is a big thing that has happened in the last week. The fall of Avdiivka, while there are now pro-Ukrainian channels talking about the fact that Avdiivka was never that important, it was never strategically important, the Russians should have captured it ages ago, what were they doing? In reality, it is a major problem for Ukraine. We are seeing all around the area of the western, or Donbass area and around Donetsk, to the west of Donetsk, seeing villages and settlements fall after this Avdiivka collapse in that area. And as I went through in a video yesterday, if that continues west of Avdiivka and Donetsk city, then areas like Vuhledar become at risk now. The Russians are just underneath Vuhledar, but they can push in from the east of the Avdiivka and Donetsk area now and cut supply lines to Vuhledar, and then it's likely to fall. And once that starts to fall, the Ukrainians are pushed back into what is sounding like inadequately prepared defensive positions. There was an article that I was reading earlier this week on one of the videos I've done. Reports from a Ukrainian Telegram channel that there has been squandering of the money that was sent to private contractors, civilian contractors, to assist with building some of these defences. That some of those companies have just taken the money, but no trenches have been dug, no fortifications have been poured, no concrete arrived, that type of thing. So what this means is that there is the opportunity or the possibility of a rout occurring where the Ukrainians get pushed back, they're on the back foot, they start moving backwards, they can't find a fortified place to stop and hold and stop the Russian advance, and they just continue to get rolled backwards. Now, there has been reports some success for the Ukrainians this week. If you depending on which media you follow, if you follow the pro-Ukrainian channels, there have been 7 Russian aircraft shot down this week. From what I have been able to glean by looking at all the sources that I do look at, it sounds like there have been 2 shot down. Now, 2 aircraft shot down this week by the, if shot down by the Ukrainians, that is a big success for them. It's a big change. There's reports that 1 MQ-9 Ukrainian jet was shot down this week. The 7 seems to just be fabricated PR propaganda. But the 2, there's reports that this is accurate. Some suggestion that this may have something to do with what has just reportedly happened in Kherson. So I go to the map. This is Kherson. Pardon me. Kherson city here, and the Dnieper River running along here. And this red spot just here is indicating the location of a reported strike on a Patriot missile system. So the reporting coming out today is that Ukraine has lost another Patriot air defense system. This air defense system, Patriot battery, the speculation is that it was brought up to near the front line, up to Kherson, so that it could reach out. I think they've got a range of 160 kilometres, depending on the missile on them, around that region, and to try to have an impact upon the Russian Air Force. May have been successful in one of those downings, one of those aircraft. However, the reports are today that this Patriot system has suffered, has been attacked. There's been at least 3 Russian strikes on that area. And there is some video which seems to confirm that a launcher and perhaps a transporter unit was destroyed. Now, just for a little bit of information, the Patriot missile system isn't just one truck with missiles on the back. There is a whole range of pieces of equipment that comprise a Patriot missile system. So I'm just going to go through and show you a couple of these. There's a control unit. So there is a truck. All of these things are mounted on trucks. There is a truck which has a control box on it. And within here is a whole heap of computers, and people sit in there, and they're the command and control center for the whole Patriot system. They also have radar unit. So there's a separate radar unit here. This is used obviously to detect the targets, the primary source of detection for the targets. They have an antenna unit. This is used for communications. There would be communications between this air defense system, this Patriot air defense system, and a command and control center further in the back. There may be communications between this and aircraft that are in the air if Ukrainians have aircraft in the air at the same time. So there are these different elements of the system. There is a power unit. So this here will be, I imagine, a diesel generator unit, which will provide power to the other elements within the Patriot system. And then finally, the launchers. And so the launchers, the ones obviously which hold the missiles and are capable of firing them once they have received their command to do so. There's large spikes on them here. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing they might be lightning arresters. That if you have a big metal box out in a field like this and there's a thunderstorm going around, you don't really want a lightning strike on it directly. You'd rather it pick off the lightning arrestor where it gets earthed safely and doesn't cause your rockets to fire or missiles to fire at that stage. Anyhow, so that happens. It looks like Ukraine may have lost another Patriot system. Now, I'm going to jump from Ukraine a little bit here. The Houthis. Where am I? Let's just have a look here. Just going to get a map here. So this is Yemen. The green area on that map is the area that is controlled by the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, as they are called. There are some reports coming out on social media, and there's been some of these for a couple of weeks now, coming out that the US strikes on the Houthis in western Yemen may be starting to cause some of the warring factions inside Yemen to put down their disagreements with one another and start to band together. There's some reports that some members of the Saudi-aligned Sunni military may be defecting and moving to join President Mahdi al-Mashat. He is the head of the Supreme Political Council, the SPC, and that he may now be seen as the true Yemeni leader. There has been a civil war in Yemen since 2014. Fighting has been going on there. That has been between the Presidential Leadership Council, which is a pro-Western Saudi-supported group, and the Supreme Political Council, which is Ansar Allah, the Houthis. In 2015, Saudi Arabia, just on the map here, Saudi Arabia is this grey mass just above Yemen. It sits above them. Here's our map here. It might be a better map. Let's just zoom out a little bit. Here we go. Here's Yemen here and Saudi Arabia. So in 2015, Saudi Arabia supported militias joined that fight. Iran, which is just here, Iran was not directly involved in the conflict between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but the conflict between the Houthis and the Presidential Leadership Council, supported by the West and by Saudi Arabia, is considered to be part of the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflict. So Iran and Saudi Arabia, see where they're positioned, they are battling for hegemonic control of the region. You know, as you expect, strong powers in an area, they start to battle over who's got control economically and militarily and all that sort of thing. So that's going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia. However, last year, in Chinese-mediated negotiations, diplomatic relations were re-established between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So we've got these inklings and stories coming out of Yemen that the Saudi-backed militias who are fighting the Houthis internally in Yemen may be backing off, and they might be starting to follow the old, hey, the enemy of your enemy is my friend, however that works. That type of thing where they are now saying, well, let's stop fighting with each other because we've both got a common enemy here, being the US at this stage. And Iran and Saudi Arabia themselves, they are reinstating their relations. So they themselves may be easing the pressure on that proxy conflict, which will then further enable the groups within Yemen to perhaps mend some fences and things and join collectively against the United States. On that topic, the Houthis have just declared the US and the UK as hostile entities. So they've come out and formalised this. Mahdi al-Mashat, the chairman of the Supreme Political Council, that Monday this week issued Presidential Resolution number 107 regarding the classification of the United States of America and the United Kingdom of Britain as two countries hostile to the Republic of Yemen. He further goes on to say the decision includes 4 articles, the first of which stipulates the classification of the United States of America and the United Kingdom of Britain at the first level stipulated of the law of classification of countries, entities and persons hostile to the Republic of Yemen as two countries that support, protect and sponsor the Zionist entity and participate in the crimes of genocide committed by the Zionist entity against the Palestinian people. So the Houthis are in support of Gaza, in support of the Palestinian people in general in Israel, and they have now said here formally that they see the United States and UK as enemies of Yemen, and they have taken this position with them as being hostile because they support Israel. It goes on, Article 2 stipulates that the two states mentioned in the previous article, the United States and the United Kingdom, shall be treated as states hostile to the Republic of Yemen and shall be dealt with in accordance with the principle of confrontation. The Article 4 stipulates that this decision will be effective from the date of its issuance and publication. Now, the Houthis are not backing down. And as I've said a number of times, I think if you wanted to look in the dictionary alongside the term of asymmetric warfare, they should have a picture of the Houthis there, because they have been able to, with limited resources, in a country that has been bombed by the United States and Saudi Arabia for years, which has many of its people suffering under hunger because of this civil war, they have been able to, with some automatic rifles and speedboats and some missiles now, been able to basically cut shipping through the Red Sea, through this area here. They've completely taken control of the Gulf of Aden, this area down here. About 2 weeks ago, there had been 30 or more events. This week, the British-flagged Ruby Mar has been struck by 2 missiles by the Houthis, and it is likely to sink. The crew has evacuated the boat, and it is likely to sink. There are reports that an Israeli-flagged ship, the MSC Silver, has also been attacked. And perhaps more importantly or interestingly, the Houthis have shot down a second MQ-9 Reaper. Now, these Reapers are big American drones. Yeah, I've got a picture of one here. These guys... this is not an insignificant achievement to shoot down one of these. These are sort of top-level American drones. They aren't super fast. They've got a maximum speed of about 400 kilometres an hour. They have a range of 11,000 kilometres, and they can stay in the air for over 40 hours. A service ceiling of 40,000 feet or 12,200 metres. So they're 12 kilometres up. They're higher than you fly when you are flying in a commercial airliner. I think they fly around 36,000 feet. These are at 40,000 feet. This is the second one of these that reportedly the Houthis have shot down. Each one of them is worth, on average, around $30 million. So, and each one of these that is taken out, and I'm sure I haven't got the numbers on how many the Americans have, but losing one of these, is not a good day at work for the crew who control them. They're autonomous in that they fly without a crew. They have no crew on board, but they do have a crew of 2 at a remote location who communicate to them, radio communication to them for the control and direction and targeting, I suppose. Perhaps not some assistance in targeting acquisition and in the final command to fire, I imagine. The humans are involved in that. But another one of these shot down. Now, the Americans have, as we know, taken bombing missions on Houthi positions, but that doesn't seem to have stopped them. And the Houthis are still exerting that asymmetric control over the Red Sea area. And now it sounds as though they are committing further to engage in confrontation with the United States and the United Kingdom in this area. Now, again, the United Kingdom, this isn't great news when they have had challenges with their aircraft carriers. The Queen Elizabeth was meant to leave a few weeks ago to lead the British contingent in the NATO Steadfast Defender exercises, which are happening up in the Baltic Sea at the moment, due to a drive shaft, propeller shaft problem. I mean, on an aircraft carrier, a drive shaft to drive one of those propellers must be massive. I don't know the diameter of them, but I imagine they're as thick as I am tall, I would imagine. Some problem there with that being unable to go. So one of the two big British aircraft carriers is not able to be operational at the moment. The other one, the Prince of Wales, was scheduled to leave just afterwards. It suffered some delays, but was able to leave a day later and has headed up to now lead the British part of those exercises. But the British can't just, for example, send out a aircraft carrier to the area now, one of those two big flagship aircraft carriers, to try to address this situation. The other thing that's problematic for not only for the British, for the Americans, for everyone with a navy, is what we've seen in the Black Sea and the success that the Ukrainians have had with their sea drones against the Russian Black Sea fleet. Number of ships sunk and damaged, both military ships, naval ships, and commercial freighters and that sort of thing have been attacked by these sea drones. Now, it can't be too far away from the Houthis doing the very same thing and starting to use them rather than missiles, sending out these sea drones at nighttime. We know that Iran is a leader in the production of aerial drones. It's quite likely they're also working on sea drones, and the Houthis may end up with some of those. The Houthis may be developing some of them themselves. I don't know. I couldn't say. But you can imagine how the concern, how after what we've seen with sea drones in Ukraine against the Russian Black Sea fleet, how military risk analysts must be sharpening their pencils and thinking, how the hell do we deal with this? Like, what happens if we fix the Queen Elizabeth, we send her out, and she gets hit by two drones and sunk? And that's a real possibility here. You know, Russian ships have been sunk. It would be possible that could happen. So now the military presence that the United States and the UK is able to project with its big aircraft carriers, the risk of them suffering an attack has gone up. And the attack surface for them has got a new vector at it. Previously, they would have been concerned, I guess, about static sea mines and looking for those. They would have been concerned about missile attacks. You know, above the Black Sea, the Russians have a constant array of MiG-31s up there flying around with Kinjal missiles, which can be fired, hypersonic missiles, which can be fired at an American aircraft carrier and could very theoretically, quite plausibly, sink one of those. So that's something they're aware of. But now they're having to be aware of small things in the water that pack a big punch and could damage them. Now, I would imagine that at night time, if you haven't prepared a defensive system on your ship for that, and by that I mean some system which is automatically able to detect something that is approaching you of that size, which may be semi-submersible, maybe moving very slowly, maybe just drifting towards you, and even maybe semi-disguised, may just look like an old 44-gallon drum floating in the ocean or something. Whatever, it floats towards you and it explodes. Imagine going through a shipping lane where there are sea mines and you've identified where they are and you know where they are. And then some of these sea mines just start moving towards you because they have a camera on them and they actually have a propulsion unit on them. And they're not really a sea mine, they're a sea drone. So challenges there. The Houthis, I think, will be able to continue to exert control in this area of the world where they are because it's quite likely that the US and UK navies may be forced to pull back, just like the Russian Black Sea Fleet has been forced to pull back out of certain ports and position their ships further away from the western flank of Crimea, where it's relatively easy access from Ukraine for Ukraine to send its sea drones. So that's happened with the Houthis. Now, somewhere else that's just been getting itself in the news in the last few days is Transnistria. So this is Moldova, and the little gold-coloured area here is Transnistria, and this is bordering the western border of Ukraine. You can see that Odessa is just down here in the Black Sea, Mykolaiv and Kherson. So just northeast, right in Kherson, just across the Dnieper River there is where that Patriot system was struck. Transnistria is a self-declared state. It's not really recognised globally as being its own state yet. It had sort of a war of independence in the early 1990s, where it fought with Moldova as it was assuming its independence, as the breakup of the Soviet Union was happening around that time. When that happened in the early 1990, they were supported by Cossacks from Russia. So some Russians travelled to Transnistria to fight on the side of the separatists, on the side of the Transnistrians. The fighting intensified until 1992, and then what was left in this area of the Soviet 14th Guards Army, so old Soviet forces, they joined the conflict with the separatists against Moldova in 1992. And after that, basically Moldova said, okay, too spiky, you look after yourself. We're not really happy with it, but they didn't want to fight anymore with those Russian forces. So strong ties with Russia, strong support from Russia. There is a peacekeeping force of Russian troops of about 1,500 Russian troops in Transnistria. Now, Transnistria in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict has remained neutral. Those troops haven't engaged. There have been one or two actions which Moldova has claimed has been perhaps those Transnistrian forces. Sorry, there are also Transnistrian forces. They have about between 5,000 and 7,500 forces, and they have some Soviet equipment. There was a couple of attacks on some maybe radar or communication sites, which was with Moldovans had said with the Transnistrians. Nothing much seemed to come from that. But as I said, and they remain neutral so far through the conflict. But if you look at the ethnic composition of Transnistria, they are 29% Russian ethnicity, 28.5% Moldovan, nearly 23% Ukrainian, and 2.4% Bulgarian and other smaller nationalities. But the majority of them are Russian and then Moldovan and then Ukrainian. So you can see why there is a Russian presence here. Nearly 30%, nearly a third of the people there are ethnically Russian. Now, all of these stories are starting to come together. It's like the sea drone attacks in the Black Sea Fleet by the Ukrainians upon the Russian Navy. The desire for the Russians to, as I'm suggesting, capture all of the oblasts to the east of the Dnieper River running down through the map here, and taking Mykolaiv and Odessa. If the Russians take Odessa, they get all of this Black Sea port as Russian port. They deprive what remains of Ukraine of that. They therefore have a lot more control, strategic control over the neutrality of Ukraine, which is what the Russians are seeking. They don't want Ukraine, after this conflict ends in some negotiated settlement, to join NATO and to arm up. They want it to become neutral, and by controlling all the ports, so taking Mykolaiv and Odessa, makes a lot of sense. It also means that if they take Mykolaiv and Odessa, no doubt they will take a barrier such that some section of Transnistria is adjacent and borders the new Russian border. So Transnistria will effectively become Russian territory all the way up here. So it allows the Russians, or will allow the Russians to, of course, place their troops and weapons in this area right up into this high point on the west of Ukraine, allowing them, of course, to have some sort of a barrier here with Moldova or Romania if they decided for some reason they wish to get into the conflict at some stage. The Russian border would also extend all the way down here, down this bottom part of Odessa and around Romania. So ultimately, I'm suggesting the Russians will end up with their border out there. Ukraine will end up with no port on the Black Sea anymore. So there are some calls now coming out about Transnistria, talking more about their independence, and they're an area to watch. They're an area to watch, as I've also suggested. Sorry, where's the other map? Let me just zoom out a little bit here. Is around here, another area to watch, as I've discussed before, is Armenia. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in some conflict. The thing to note about Armenia is its location. It is here between Turkey and Iran and Russia. Georgia's in the way, but Russia is just up here. Armenia actually has a small border with Iran. And right now, Denis Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia, is making the decision to sever ties with Russia and strengthen ties militarily with the West, with France and the United States. And last year, in September of last year, when Armenia, who is a member of the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a grouping with about 5 or 6 states in this area, Russia, Armenia being 2 of them, a collective, like a small NATO, if you will, sort of a Russian-led NATO. Armenia declined to host the CSTO military exercises that were meant to happen, and instead engaged in what was called something like Eagle Defender, and engaged with American forces in American training, military training, and the goals of that training was getting the Armenian troops familiar with NATO equipment, NATO doctrine, NATO practices, that type of thing. So the Americans looking to position themselves in Armenia. If Armenia says, yes, great, come in, you can put your weapons where you like, the Americans can now put missiles right here with Iran. So I think Armenia, I think that, yes, Transnistria, something could happen here. I don't think anything major is going to happen. At the moment, they're too far away for Russia to support them. They only have 1,500 troops and their own 5,000 troops. Kicking off a fight there, I don't think that would happen. They may, perhaps when Russia has breached the Dnieper and perhaps taken Mykolaiv and are on their way to Odessa, we might find at that stage that those Russian troops and those Transnistrian troops may help to take Odessa. That's possible. At that time, they would be relatively safe in doing that. At the moment, I don't think they're going to do anything. However, Armenia, separate to the Ukrainian conflict, but more to do with the Middle Eastern conflict in Israel, they are playing a very risky game at the moment. They have given up the Nagorno-Karabakh area. This area here was a contested area between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Denis Pashinyan has now said it's actually Azerbaijani land, have it back. What that has done has ended a major territorial dispute between the two, making it easier for Armenia if they wish to do something like join NATO. NATO doesn't want to let you in if you're having a big territorial dispute with your neighbour, but if you're not doing that, easier for you to get in. So I'm sure Pashinyan personally is receiving some hell of a benefit to make these decisions given his position here. But if he's gambling wrong, there's a real chance, I think, that Armenia could become Ukraine 2.0. And what I mean by that is that they become a proxy nation for a United States conflict, this time not with Russia, but with Iran. And those Armenian people are at risk of suffering the same fate that the Ukrainian people are suffering at this time. Okay, I've got a couple of things. A couple of things to go through. One thing I wanted to touch on, China. China in the International Court of Justice, and this reporting is coming from the Times of Israel online newspaper. Ma Jinmin, who is China's foreign ministry's legal advisor, told the court in The Hague in the Netherlands that Palestine has the right to armed struggle in pursuit of self-determination. That's fair enough. I mean, everyone probably agrees with that. Palestine has the right to armed struggle in the pursuit of self-determination. But the next line, armed struggle in pursuit of self-determination is not terrorism, is what China's position now is. Now, China has been pretty vocal from October the 7th. They see the solution as being a two-state solution, a Palestinian state formed and an Israel state formed. There's a lot of challenges to that. Like, while I know that's what we think you want, getting there, I think, is very difficult. How you get the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to that when he has come out publicly and said that he does not support that. Sorry, just going to the map here. So this is Israel here. You know, the southern area of Gaza. This is Gaza here. The southern area of Gaza is Rafah down here. The West Bank over in this area, you know, actually trying to connect the West Bank and Gaza and make a two-state solution work in there. That's a tough job. I don't know how you would do that. But China's position has been that that is the path that must be taken here. However, this comment now that the armed struggle of the Palestinian people in pursuit of self-determination, so when you're saying armed struggle, we're talking about Hamas here, their pursuit for self-determination is not terrorism. Now, this is a big call. There's a big meaning behind these small words from China. China are saying here that we don't see Hamas as a terrorist organization. We see Hamas as the armed struggle, the manifestation of the armed struggle of Palestine. So this is at complete odds with the United States and their position on this. The United States sees Hamas classifies them as a terrorist organization. So very interesting. You know, we can see a line being drawn now, really slowly but clearly and firmly by China, saying that we don't see that as terrorist attacks. We see this as a legitimate, rightful struggle for self-determination. So when the United States are saying, well, we can do all these things, Israel can do all of these things because they are justified, because they are dealing with a terrorist organization of Hamas, the Chinese are saying, we don't see it that way. That's not the way that it is from the Chinese perspective. So I think this is a very big announcement coming out publicly in the International Court of Justice in The Hague for China to openly take this position. In the long term, while I don't think this is likely to be China's position, but in the long term, this sets the scene for China if they wished to lend support to Hamas and Palestinians in the West Bank, that they could do this now with the underpinning that they do not believe that they are arming any terrorist organisations. They believe that they would be supporting a group of people in their rightful struggle and in pursuit for their self-determination. So another front now of contention between the United States and the Chinese, without either of them being directly involved in this conflict. China not involved at all in this conflict. America obviously involved very heavily in this conflict with the shielding of Israel in front of them. But as we know, Israel receives billions of dollars of military aid each year from the United States and has recently been able to purchase from the United States millions of dollars of weapons to enable them to continue with this conflict they are having with Gaza and the Palestinians. So interesting development in terms of China's position there. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Russian Ministry of Defense summary of what's happened in Ukraine. Ministry of Defense reports have come out. I will just summarise them. I'm not going to go through them in great detail today. But the number of Ukrainian troops reported killed and wounded yesterday in the last 24 hours of fighting is 790 men. This is back to perhaps the higher level that we've seen over the last 8 weeks. There have been some days over the last few weeks, excluding what has just happened in Avdiivka, but even prior to that, a couple of weeks prior to that, there have been some days where there has been over 1,000 reportedly killed or wounded. There's a lot of good information to back up the fact that those numbers are probably correct, that those numbers aren't orders of magnitude wrong, given that we have Ukrainian parliamentary sources suggesting the same numbers, suggesting 1,000, they're losing 1,000 men a day. So 790, nearly 800, a relatively high number, but not as high as it has been. Just do a quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 14 or 15 pieces of artillery reportedly destroyed, and 7 of those self-propelled units. Polish Krabs and Jansens and Gwodzikas, these type of things, a Bogdana self-propelled artillery system. So losing a high percentage, looks about 50%, maybe a little less than 50%. Self-propelled units, this is devastating in the counter artillery war that Ukraine is trying to fight with Russia. Losing those mobile pieces is a big loss, because those mobile pieces should be harder to hit than your stationary ones. You'll see footage of stationary artillery pieces where they'll get dug into a ground and they're hidden under some trees and they have some camouflage netting over them, but they're stuck there and they fire from there. And as soon as someone on the other side targets, you've been firing for too long and they target you, well, you can't just pick up and run. If shells start coming back at you, there's a good chance you'll get hit. With the self-propelled units, you can move around, you can drive. These things can stop, set up, fire a shell and move. Fire another shell and move. So far more difficult to use your counter battery radar on something that's mobile. There's reports that also the Ukrainians have lost another counter battery radar, and that they have lost an electronic warfare unit as well. So something they're looking to, most likely I would suggest it would be looking to suppress FPV and Lancet drones in an area. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians are flying hundreds, if not thousands a day of these drones. They're becoming ubiquitous on the front line. There are reports over Avdiivka that there were hundreds of them in the sky over Avdiivka at any one time. Whether that's true or an exaggeration, I don't know. But they are having these fights. So obviously anyone who is able to counteract their opponent's drone capability suddenly has a great advantage. You know, if your men in the trenches don't have to worry about the enemy drones, they can operate normally now, operate more freely, they can advance more freely. You've seen all of the videos of the poor single soldiers on either side who are, running, swinging their rifles, trying to kick at the last moment to get one of these drones away from them, and just horribly, being unsuccessful in that attempt to save their lives. So an EW, electronic warfare system, also lost in the fighting. And yeah, look, a lot of movement to the west of Avdiivka. The Russians taking Lastochno, moving to Berichi. Movements up in the Zaporozhye region from Robotny and Verbova, in the area of Bradley Square. The Ukrainians fought so hard and lost so many men and equipment to make those gains, to get down to Verbova, to get down and touch the Surovikin line, the strong Russian defensive line, to now see all of that work being unwound as they're being pushed back. Similar as you move east to the Veremka Ledge, where they came down from Neskuchny and made it as far down as Staromayorska and Urozhaina, again being pushed back there now. Also movement on the northwest and northeastern flank, which is up in the Kupiansk area. Reports now of increasing pressure from the Russians around Kupiansk. The challenge there for the Ukrainians is that if the Russians do get in and take Kupiansk, they have the Oskol River there, and they are then able to roll down the Oskol River. We're up here. So this is Kupiansk. Oh, sorry, I'm not showing you the map. Here we go. Kupiansk here and the Oskol River. So the Russians are right around here at this stage, just around here. Once they take Kupiansk and cut that crossroads of supply down here, then these bridges across the river have been cut through here. So right now the Ukrainians are being forced to come down this supply road and then jump over the river here to resupply into this area. Once Kupiansk is taken and that's cut, it becomes very difficult for them to do that. And the Russians can then roll down this river, using the river as a natural barrier on their right flank as they come down. So it's a tough situation for the Ukrainians developing in the Kupiansk area. Right. Last couple of pieces. The US have landed a unit on the moon. It's been 50 years since the United States have been there. India did this last year. They put a lander on the moon. Russia did, but there's crashed and lost communication with it. There are plans from the Chinese to put men on the moon by 2030. So only within the next 7 years, putting men back on the moon. I think the plans are ideally to look to establish some sort of a moon base at some stage. Perhaps now in 2030, we'll be far more capable with things like, for example, reusable rockets like the SpaceX rockets, which are able to fly, to send units into orbit and then return. So much lower cost per kilogram of sending things into space, send up a bunch of components, get to the moon, establish some sort of a permanent base, and you can pay for it then with space tourism. You can charge the mega rich $50 million a pop to go and spend a week on the moon or whatever it might be, which I imagine is the sort of thing that we will see in the next decade if we're starting to put men up there regularly by 2030. Then just the last thing, Joe Biden. There's a lot of things to say about Joe Biden, but while President Putin has been jumping and climbing vertical ladders to get into planes, driving trucks and helping to co-pilot SU-160 bombers, the big swept-wing Russian bombers, where 4 more of them have been developed and are being deployed into the Russian Air Force. Joe Biden has been tripping again, going up steps into planes. He has called Putin a crazy son of a bitch, reportedly, at a San Francisco fundraiser. Putin's response, what he fielded it very well. He apparently sort of said, "Oh yeah, I agree. It's probably a relatively accurate assessment of me, or something like that. And I'm happy to work with whichever president of the United States vote in next." He's certainly sort of trolling Biden around that one, but just not a good look from a president who should be a leader, someone who should have some dignity, grace, charisma, calmness, a steadiness about them, joking off and calling the leader of Russia, who's been the leader for a long time and seems to be doing a relatively good job against you militarily, a crazy son of a bitch, just doesn't add anything to Joe Biden's legacy. And he can't have that much longer to go. He can't win the next election. He's becoming too frail mentally and physically to be able to do that for another 4 years. Even a lot of Democrats are admitting this quietly now, that Biden just can't be the pick, and this is where they're struggling. The Democrats are stuck. They can't take Biden, which logically means Kamala Harris becomes the next president, a female black president. But they can't put her in because her approval ratings are down at the same level that Joe Biden's are. So they know they can't put her up as a candidate and win. So they're stuck. Now, who do they put in? So this is why there's people are saying, well, Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama has reportedly said, no, there's no way of doing it. I've seen what that's like. I don't want to do that. But there's going to be a lot of pressure put on the Democratic Party to find someone. Gavin Newsom is a suggestion, but Gavin Newsom against Trump, I don't personally think so. I think Trump will eat him for breakfast. But Michelle Obama against Trump, now you've got a real race, a real challenge. Hillary Clinton against Trump, no one really likes Hillary. But Michelle Obama, I can see her getting a big Democratic vote. Whether she will make the decision or not, she might be playing it down now. But at some stage between now and November, the Democrats have to figure out who they're going to put forward. Like I say, normally it would be Joe's too old. Now he's done a great job. And we've got this wonderful candidate in Kamala who you all love and know, but people don't love her. And she's just not going to get the votes. Anyhow, that's it for today. It is Friday evening where I am about to roll into the weekend. Just so you know, on the channel, if you are a subscriber, I have now just reached 1,000 subscribers, so I'm now able to put on membership. So I have created some membership levels. Check them out if you're interested. The base level will get you access to some members-only videos and that members-only shorts and that sort of thing. So if I get a few people subscribing, I will start to produce a little bit of members-only content. It'll probably be a shorter form, but it will be perhaps some more off-the-cuff, slightly unfiltered comments on things which we will just keep for members only. There's a couple of levels of the membership in there, getting you to, if you want to pay a little extra, to get members-only live streams, and ultimately getting up to some private live streams. Like I'm looking at the idea of being able to run a couple of sessions with a few select people, private invite, do a live stream, talk about it together, be able to talk on some specific topics that groups of no more than 5 would be interested in. Anyhow, that's there if you're interested in the channel. And if you are a subscriber, thank you. Really, thank you for supporting the channel this far. I'm looking to keep it growing. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying doing it. Have a good weekend, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.